South Africa's unemployment rate is on the rise. According to the quarterly labour force survey, which was released from Stats SA this morning, unemployment has increased to 30.1% in the first 3 months of 2020. That's from 29.1% in the fourth quarter of last year. Stats SA's data further indicates that the number of employed people has decreased by 38,000 to 16.4 million, while the number of unemployed persons increased by 344,000 to 7 million in the first quarter of this year compared to the fourth quarter of last year. Now, the largest employment decreases were observed in the formal sector, followed then by agriculture. Let's unpack these numbers a little bit more then with the Statistician-General himself, Risenga Maluleke. Thank you so much for joining us, Baba. I appreciate your time in these difficult moments, I suppose, then as well, right? It has been a set of numbers, I suppose, that can tell that things are certainly different. Are you getting a sense that what we have right now in the data is indeed the highest you've seen in recorded time for Stats SA?
Certainly, this is the highest we have seen in recent times, not even in recent times, let me say, in the history of the labor force survey, even before we started with the quarterly labor force survey. Let us look at about 10 years ago. We were sitting at about 25.1%, so we have increased by 5 percentage points. In relation to last year, just where we were sitting, we have increased by about 2.5 percentage points. And to be specific, this is the highest we have seen. Unemployment has been rising steadily in South Africa over time. But let me mention that these numbers that we are seeing are nowhere affected by the COVID-19 environment, because by the time the lockdown was put in place, the collection for the first quarter as of January to March 2020 was completed.
Sure. The numbers then themselves point to absolutely a very dire picture then. That's almost a third of the country of people who are able to be employed, unable to get a job or not having a job at this point in time. In which sectors, if you don't mind us getting into those nitty-gritties, have experienced the most level of decrease thus far in employment?
Let us look at finance, which has recorded the highest number of job losses, 50,000 of job losses in that area, especially in the architectural and engineering areas, as well as in legal and advertising. It was followed by government and social services, which lost about 30,000 jobs, and agriculture, especially in the area of land and animal production, as well as other areas in agriculture. It has lost about 21,000 jobs. And indeed, we have seen job losses as well in transport, in in rail transport, as well as in other land transport. So these are the areas that have recorded the highest job losses. And one of the things we have also observed is that women are vulnerable to labor markets, as always. We have seen it over time. But in particular, Black African women, who are sitting at 36.4%, and when you compare that with the national average of 31.1%, they're a bit higher. And furthermore, young people, especially those aged 15 to 24 years, are actually much more vulnerable to labor markets, with their unemployment rate sitting at 59%.
Yeah. As a data man, could you say then that the policies we were meant to implement in the past, including those of the NDP, were not, maybe not even successfully, but certainly to a very, very small, a very large degree, were not implemented, creating the problem we currently have, which doesn't even take into account COVID-19 and its impact?
Firstly is that as a statistician in official practice, like any other statistician in the world, we don't dabble into the policy space. It's not our job to even comment about the policy space, because we are supposed to be independent. All we do is to make numbers available to policymakers, to leaders in business, as well as to members of the public. But one thing that we can say is that look at previously when the target for the NDP, which we have tracked for a very long time, had said by 2030 we needed our unemployment to be sitting at 6%. And by 2020, we needed it to be sitting at 14%. It's 2020 now, we are sitting at 30.1%, certainly a far cry from the 14% that the policymakers had set themselves to achieve. We are still 10 years away from 2030, and of course there are new targets now. But if you ask me, it's not the job of us as statisticians to track whether policies are being implemented or not. Our job is to provide numbers that respond to the policy space and inform members of the public so that policymakers and members of the public can continue engaging on the kind of goals they want to achieve.
Do the numbers point to South Africa being in a dire economic and fundamental state then, Mr. Statistician-General?
Well, let us look at the last quarter of 2019 when we released our economic statistics in the form of GDP. We already indicated that 2 quarters in a row we were in recession. Unemployment is continuing to rise. Now, for us as statisticians, we never feel difficult or palatable numbers, dire or not dire. If we start having those taste buds, we'll never make numbers available. But when we look at our GDP growth, which is in recession and unemployment going relatively higher, certainly there is something that in the policy space that will need intervention. Even before you look at the COVID-19 environment. The COVID-19 environment just puts another spin into the whole issue because it's not only affecting South Africa, but it's affecting the whole world.
Let's talk about your operations very quickly then. With the COVID-19 impact, it's obviously slowed your ability to gather data and the like as well. How much more difficult are things at Stats right now, whether it comes with regards to employment freezes, so unable to get more employees in your office, and as well as the data collection? How bad is the scenario at Stats?
I want us to separate the issue of the inability to hire staff members in Stats SA from our operations in the present space. Of course, our inability to hire employees has been taking place over time since 2016. We have turned the corner now with National Treasury that we have had some money set aside, and we will be addressing this space in the nearest future. So that is the one part, but that has had adverse effects in the expertise and skills that we had in the organization, because we have lost a lot of staff members, about 100 staff members per annum. And in over 3 years now, we have lost more than 300 staff members, and some of who are our key technical people and people with experience. And it takes us a lot of time to build the kind of expertise we have had over time. Now, let us look at that separately and say, certainly it has an effect, but Stats SA continues to do its work. Now, the space we find ourselves in the COVID-19 is something else, because then it affects our operations. But that one doesn't affect Stats SA alone. It affects every agency in the world, as well as every aspect and facet of life all over the world. And in this regard, we have seen our products being delayed a bit coming out of the lockdown, but also because we can't have our field workers out there in the field collecting data in the traditional way we're used to. We are looking at other methods, including technology, and that has a bearing in our timelines, and we are monitoring that closely. But as regards quality, we will never make any number available to the public unless we have actually satisfied ourselves that it's meeting quality prescription. Having said that, even in the challenging environment of COVID-19, Stats SA remains in business in all eternity.
Yeah. All right. Mr. Statistician-General, thank you so much for the time. Really do appreciate it there. It certainly is a difficult and unprecedented time, certainly across the country. Statistician-General there, Risenga Maluleke, joining us there for that look on the numbers.